Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Blackbird. Today I am with Amy Willmann and Linda Mortensen with the Safe Harbor House in Springfield. To start off, can you tell me a little bit about Safe Harbor House, how this started, where the concept came from?
Sure, yes. Our founder, Dr. Joy Fagan, at the time she was an instructor at Cedarville University, but she was also serving as a volunteer chaplain at the Clark County Jail. And her time at the jail just really opened her eyes to the plight of women who had suffered from very severe trauma, and yet at some point, instead of intervention and healing and help, they had just fallen into some behaviors that ended up being something that they were incarcerated for. Mm-hmm. So they were like, wait, this is criminalizing trauma, so she started to really ask herself, is there something we can do to not only prevent trauma survivors who have been trafficked, abused, that maybe have been victims of domestic violence, to prevent them from ending up in these desperate situations, but also, is there a safe place for them to go and heal after they've maybe done rehab or after they've been incarcerated? Is there a safe place for them to go and work on these systemic issues?
She had the idea that there would be many people supporting each resident as they walk through our program. So she had in mind each woman would have a mentor. That person would serve mostly in the capacity of the older, wiser spiritual friend, and that they would see a professional counselor on a regular basis, that they would each have a coach that would work with them on a weekly basis from one of the staff members. So that vision, she was really looking at a large vision. She wasn't looking at a narrow vision of just recovering or just healing the mind. She was actually looking at a whole lot more than that, a really holistic view.
Can you tell me a little bit about the process of when a woman comes to Safe Harbor House? What does the next year or 2 years look like for her here?
We focus on our first phase, stabilizing, because we know the level of trauma that a sex trafficking victim or a domestic violence victim or someone with severe childhood trauma, they're coming to us with what's called a dual diagnosis, some form of complex PTSD, trauma-related disorders and diagnoses, and then substance abuse disorder. And so we know that stabilizing is going to be the first thing, and the fog needs to lift. Their fight or flight, their amygdala and all of that, that part of their even just neurological reality needs to get used to, I'm safe here. And so they're still absorbing the content and the classes and the relationships, but that first phase is often stabilizing is our big goal, and it's beautiful when you start to see that happen. And then the second phase, we focus on healing. So that's when they start to gain some traction with their licensed trauma therapists and counselors, doctors, primary care providers in the community. Mm-hmm. And they really start to explore all the areas of healing and the different modalities of healing that we have here. The third phase then, we like to say, is building, because stabilizing and healing is quite a foundation. Mm-hmm. Now we want to start building some life skills on top of that and start exploring some things like maybe I could start working on my GED, or I could go back to college, or I could get a job and start exploring, some life skills and some really even self-discovery during that building phase. Mm-hmm. And then we call the last phase of the program soaring, because that's when by then they're starting to think about things like, what do I want to do? Not only who am I, what do I like, what are my preferences? Mm-hmm. Things that people who have been coerced and manipulated and in codependent relationships that they often haven't discovered about themselves. So soaring is really dreaming and planning and kind of getting a vision for their lives, but they have that coach that is helping them do that in a systematic way.
I would like to hear more about a time either of you faced if you have another to share, about obstacles and doubt, just in this process of making this thing work and going towards this goal.
Yeah, I think, all of us, once you get into an organization where there's actually a healthy culture and where women are truly being vulnerable and strong, and you start to admit to one another, like, oh, I feel like an imposter, like I feel like I'm not qualified enough in this area, and we started, really, kind of celebrating that vulnerability.
We hear so many stories of trauma, and there was a point in time where I was personally so affected that I had to seek out professional counseling for myself, because it's just, it hits you day in, day out. I knew that if I didn't get professional help for myself and be a good role model for what you do when you're struggling with mentally and emotionally, that I would not be able to sustain working at Safe Harbor. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest obstacles I've been able to overcome. But I feel like it set in place a good, I was open and honest with the other staff members, so I think it set in place a really good example. And it was hard to be that vulnerable, but I really felt like it was important to be that vulnerable.
What do you think the biggest key to success is for women moving past this trauma?
Understanding that it's going to be a long haul, and that it's not going to be a quick fix. When you have suffered from abuse from the time you were a young child, and you have experienced abuse in your adult life as well, that's not going to be fixed in 12 to 18 months. That's going to be the start of the journey, really. The difficult part is right now, but that they can develop these skills of resilience that will enable them to withstand, and it's going to get easier day by day. So we try to really kind of help them understand it's not always going to feel like this. You're going to feel better, but it is initially really difficult, and it takes sticking with it and being dedicated to going through that initial intense pain.
It seems almost trite to say, trust the process, trust the people, but if they don't trust the process and they don't trust the people, it's not possible. It's just not possible, because they have to be able to actually feel safe to let down their guard and let somebody come around with several somebodies come around with all this support, and kind of let go of some of their coping and maladaptive and survival skills they're not serving them well anymore. They've become dysfunctional and harmful.
Kind of wrapping things up, what would you say to somebody who may be watching right now, who has an idea or has a passion that they think could potentially help their neighbor next door or change the world on any scale? What piece of encouragement would you give them that maybe you've picked up along your way?
I have on many occasions felt God saying to me, do the work I set in front of you. Usually what that means to me is the thing that God is, like, that I feel really passionate about in the moment. And the thing that is so ever present in my mind at the moment.
One of the things I love to tell people is we can all do something great to change the world, and it's often connected to what's already in our hands, what we're already good at, what we're already passionate about. And sometimes we're thinking God's going to call us into this big other, and it's actually right in front of us, and it's something that already makes us angry in a good way, or makes our blood boil in a good way.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being with us today.
Yes, so you're so welcome, and we're grateful.
Yeah,
thank you. And thank you guys for tuning in again. Join us next time for the next episode of Blackbird.